With being absolutely obsessed with Fable, and since moving into a bigger office about 3 months ago, I now have the space to buy collectibles and books created for the Fable franchise. With this, I bought the art behind Fable 2, Fable 3, and the art of Fable Legends. Let me tell you, there's some pretty fascinating lore in there. Anyway, just as I did a few months ago with Fable 2, which you guys seem to like, I thought I would put together a video showing my discoveries and thoughts on information within the Fable 3 book. I feel fairly confident by now with my knowledge of Fable 3 that I can spot differences here and there in the book, which I purchased online, linked below. I found a fair few fascinating things that I wanted to share, discuss, and question. Timestamps are in the description below for the categories too. I'm mostly making this to show you the amazing art and concepts behind the game, and I'll add a little narration too. I'm not a game designer or an expert in level design in the slightest, these are just my thoughts. Let's begin. So the book I'm looking at is the Fable 3 Collector's Edition Strategy Guide, and while the sections on each region, collectibles, enemy type and general synopsis of the game is interesting enough, at the back of the book there is a dedicated section on the art of Fable 3. While the art itself is great to view, I love looking at pieces like this that show the development, idea changes, and overall background view of the characters, creatures, and locations we love about Fable 3. There is a lot to this book. I have picked out what I thought to be the most interesting aspects, but there is much more than I have shown in the video to be explored. I may create a part 2. Opening on to the first part of this section, we see a ton of concept art and writings from the developers to show their thought process. Firstly, I notice an automated looking creature with a design in the center of it. This instantly gives off Auroran vibes. It looks down on 4 objects that all share a similar design. While I have absolutely no idea what these turned into, I believe that they would have been some sort of Auroran enemy. Moving on, we have an Auroran style pattern. Next, we have the silhouette of a large city either on a cliff or next to water, with this whole page seemingly dedicated to the developer's thoughts and design on the Auroran part of the game. We can assume that this was possibly a deserted Auroran city, or it was how the city of Aurora had been originally envisioned. One piece of art that jumps out to me here is the image of the tentacles. This instantly screams out as Kraken. The Kraken species and their backstory is so well done in my opinion. I always like to believe that they were still out there surviving in the Fable universe away from the people of Albion, or the people that had come across them had simply been killed by them. This art is just a nice nod to that. Moving on, we have a Sentinel. I hated these guys. What is interesting here is that the developers did have the plan or thought to at one point give them a flit switch option that showed whether they were attacking or defending. This would have been great as it adds to their mechanical nature. A shame there really. Further down, we have a design for masks that seemingly have been thought to signify the alignment of the character playing. It's great that at one point they thought about going back to their roots. On the next page, we have a foreword from the art director of Fable 3, John McCormack. While this does not give away any development ideas or spoilers, as a British person, reading this part where he explains what jammy means kind of made me realise that the guys from other parts of the world would not get the meaning of such an odd phrase. I just assumed that everybody from all over the world would know what jammy meant. But I understand now. As he writes, being described as jammy means that the person in question is a very fortunate individual indeed. Rest in peace, Jammy. I always tried to save him, and I did hear that even if you do save him from every battle, he will just die anyway because he is programmed to do so. While this first section was a mixed collection of the concepts from the first page, here the video should be a bit more structured. With the characters, we got some great concept art. Beginning with the male hero. There is not really anything here that I would class as noteworthy in terms of unused content, but the art here does look great. It just makes you realise just how much thought went into designing the various outfits. The mage outfit is my favourite, obviously, as I always tend to play a magic based character. What is interesting about this one though is that he does wield a magic staff. Could that have been an option for those that use the abilities of will during the Age of Enlightenment? I think I would prefer the hero to use an object like a staff that would allow them to use their abilities instead of the gauntlets that we got. Moving on to the female hero. Again, not a lot to show here, aside from the great concepts again, but what did stand out to me is the image of the hero dual wielding 2 blades. Interesting. Again, some great concepts for outfits here, and it looks like they were implemented pretty well into the game. Turns out, there were 2,000 outfit combinations from everything they implemented. That's nuts. Logan seems to have gone through many changes through his development. While we are all familiar with the strong, physically drained king that we received in the final product, looking at this art, we can see how much he changed. Looking at the little blurb here, we can see that Lionhead originally began with a Richard III type figure disfigured by his own hatred and paranoia. Just look at how mad and broken he looks here. Moving from this, he went through various stages. Even at one point, he was blonde. While his look did change through his various stages of development, his tired appearance remains a constant. Truly a great and tragic character from Lionhead. Walter truly was one of the best sources of comfort during the Fable 3 playthrough. We saw him happy, sad and angry. Not only that, he also had a fantastic backstory. While the art book does not show a lot about his development in terms of concept art, the blurb detailing his page within the book states that he did in fact go through many iterations. Walter was also one of the first characters that Lionhead created for the game. Not a lot of information on Walter there, but interesting regardless. Jasper is another interesting character to look into. Again, while the book does not give a lot of information away about his development, we can see here that he went through a ton of concepts and changes. Looking at all these, I think they all kind of work with the loyal servant character we received. I guess they always intended him to be older, and we can absolutely see that these were just the designs to see what kind of worked, and can absolutely see that these were just designs to see what kind of worked, and then they took pieces from each one to create the Jasper that we know and love now. His outfit, at least from the versions we can see here, also seemed to stay within the fancy old school tuxedo kind of look. While I do love the Jasper we got, I do really like the look of this one. While I have not yet created a lore video on page, I do really like her and her story. With these concepts, we can see that Lionhead were playing with the steampunk theme due to the time that the game is set. Sadly, it looks like this was just a thought, as the page we received does not have any resemblance to these looks. I feel like steampunk would have fit in perfectly within Bowerstone due to the industrial revolution that occurred during the age. Even in this image, we have a heart under Paige's eye, which I guess the developers liked, but not for Paige, and so they must have given it to Reaver instead. As a strong female character in the series, her outfit and general appearance complemented her personality and goals well. The attention is on her goals instead of what she looks like. These art pieces are truly stunning. Just like Walter's page, we unfortunately do not get a lot of information about Ben from this. From the rough concept pieces here, he seems to have always had a similar look, unless there are other pieces out there that the team decided not to include here. In my opinion, Sabine was always an interesting character, not because of his design, but because of his awful Welsh accent. As a Welsh person myself, I could instantly spot it was just off, and I'm from North Wales, my accent isn't even that strong. Within the blurb, Mike McCarthy makes note of the accent. Whoever would have guessed that he would turn out to have such a great Welsh accent too? I'm hoping this is sarcasm. Again, not a lot of information on the concepts behind Sabine and Boulder, but we do get some great doodles here that show Boulder holding a smaller dog on a lead, which suggests his love for the four-legged animals. This connects to his reaction when he sees the hero's dog too. Another piece of art shows Sabine kind of riding Boulder like a kid on his parents' shoulders. In the blurb, it does state that this at one point was a thought that the developers had had on how he would move around, but unfortunately, it just wasn't possible to recreate. We do love Sabine, even if he did have a crap Welsh accent. Here we have a fan favourite, Major Swift. As we know about this fine moustache soldier, he did not have a great end, but his death became a strong moment for the resistance and their cause to push forward even further to remove Logan from the throne. From the art, we can see his design after being beaten by Logan's men, and even some interesting variations of his hair. I personally prefer this. I can also see a similar style to Paige here in terms of a steampunk look. I wonder why they did not go down this road. It could have been interesting. The facial hair on this guy, regardless of which concept we look at, is impressive anyway. Another fan favourite here, Reaver. Between Fable 2 and Fable 3, Reaver had a complete refresh to his look, taking on a more businessman steampunk look. As always, he looks sophisticated. but even from these, we can see the sadistic expression on his face in each one. It looks like Lionhead had a strong idea of the direction they wanted to go with Reaver, and what I do like about this page are the images of Barry Hatch too, kind of deviously watching from behind Reaver, a perfect minion for an intelligent manipulator. Kalin, the leader of the Aurorans, seems to have gone through a couple of design changes here. The blurb here states that Kalin was influenced by Middle Eastern and North African traditional villager clothes. As a spiritual leader, we can also see other outfits that were either planned for her during the game, or maybe even possible DLC. It's a shame we did not get to see her in these robes, but I understand that these may have been drawn up during the early stages of her creation, and maybe just did not make the cut. Personally, I did not care for Elise or Elliott. I honestly found them pretty annoying, so you can guess who I chose to save at the beginning of the game during my playthroughs of Fable 3. In this art, we can see that Lionhead went through various designs for both of these characters, while we received fairly neutral looking characters that would complement the neutral look of our protagonist. I can see that there seems to be darker versions of them with black hair and different styles. I think that it would have been great for these characters to adapt alongside the protagonist as we play. Just a thought on my part here though. I always like to look at the various non-playable characters that we come across during Fable. As established in Fable 2, each region is given characters with a set of clothing depending on their social standing. Within the castle, only the rich seem to visit. These looks do not disappoint. What I did notice is the tiny dog that this lady is holding. I would have loved to see other dogs in the world just by their owners and how the dogs would have interacted with ours. This is the second dog we have seen that seems to be interacting with a non-playable character, so I do have to question, was this an option at one point that simply did not make it into the game? Would NPCs have had dogs too? The Sanctuary and world map of Fable is something completely different to everything we have seen in other games. What I love about this page is that we can see how these early designs help create a completely polished world map. While I still see this map as the weakest out of the 3 games, it was still an interesting concept. I did like the fact that when you pressed on each region, you could see the villagers walking around. I can imagine this was a great feature for some players, but it just wasn't my cup of tea. What is interesting here is that we can see the names of the locations in yellow under each one, an icon above Millfields that looks like it could possibly symbolize family, and there is a red cannon near Bowerstone Castle, which I think at one point would have been used to symbolize the progress of the Resistance. While the map we received was great, it is still interesting to view what could have been. One of Bowerstone's most iconic features during Fable 2 was the clock tower. The clock tower in Fable 2 actually reminded me of the town where I moved to for university, and so it does hold some significance for me. Here we can see the various concepts of design of how Lionhead envisioned it to have changed over the 50 years between Fable 2 and Fable 3. This is absolutely one of my favourite locations in Fable 3. I love the whole aesthetic with people working, the poor on the streets, and the ships coming and going. The atmosphere created in this region was done extremely well by Lionhead. The concepts here truly do not disappoint. It shows the smoggy, industrial region at its finest, and they created this area perfectly. While on the topic of Bowerstone, here is an early concept of Bowerstone and its canals. The first concept truly shows how overpopulated the city has gotten with buildings piled on top of each other, and below it, we have the early canals which kind of give off a new Shio vibe from the Shivering Isles DLC in Oblivion. Once again, giving it a highly populated feel where Bowerstone has truly boomed as a city. Mistpeak Valley is an absolutely stunning region and the main point of connection between the regions in Fable 3. While there is not a lot to note here, I think we can all admire the beauty of these concepts and how vast and magnificent the artists initially planned the region to be. While Mistpeak Valley was absolutely huge, this art shows the land spanning for miles and miles. In this blurb written by Mark Williams, he states that the region went through a couple of looks, one of which being the Dweller Camp designed initially to be a winter wonderland, but as development continued, they decided on the harsh Siberian gulag that fits perfectly with the depressing feel that was needed to push the hero in their story. We do get lots of nice images of the caravans here too, but my main focus for this is the stunning scenery. Within the book, we are lucky enough to get a glimpse of the development of Brightwall. The first image shows us something more similar to what we received, a rustic hamlet close to the mountains. The gates and bridge look a little less developed than the completed version, so I can assume that the people of Brightwall were at one point slightly behind in terms of construction and architecture in comparison to the other developed regions of Albion. Moving on, we can see how different the library is too. On this one, we can see it is a giant stone building that seems to take up a large chunk of the town, while under this one, the structure is built into the wall at the back of the town. I do think here about the thought process that went behind the town we got. The Mercenary Camp, or within the book described as the Renegade Camp, is the first place we fight a boss, Seika. Nothing too much to note here, just an early concept of the camp and how the gate would work. We also have some of the flags on the towers around the region. I like that even here, the designers made notes on where to put the bullet holes to signify to the player that this area has seen death and war. The guys here are not to be messed with. The Mourningwood region is home to the Eco Village, and here we can see its concept. Very similar to the Eco Village we received, just this one happens to have more sewage around the area, something I do personally like. Moving on, we have some concepts of the buildings which are extremely charming. The sewer exit here appears to be more grand and open than what we did receive. What does stand out to me is just how much sewage there is, understandably. It just looks gross, but in a good way I guess. We can see here how the developers did want to push the architecture as the villagers used the scraps that had come their way and created housing and other structures around their village, leaving nothing to waste. We gain an even better insight into this region over the following pages by getting some incredible concepts for Mourningwood. The swamp itself is very similar, if not more eerie than the swamp we received, and the fort looks so grand and intimidating with the green light from the pollution streaming through the windows. Absolutely stunning. Millfields is a stunning region, and your choices determine how the land is adapted. Does it stay a luscious region full of vegetation, grand houses and greenery overlooking the central lake? Or is it converted into an eyesore of a mine where the ruler of Albion plunders the area underneath the lake for its natural resources? Here, we can see the different variations of the concepts for the same region, but in very different states. I always chose to keep it stunning, but I'm sure there were benefits to reducing it to a gold source too. After landing in Aurora after your boat sinks, your hero eventually discovers the vast Auroran desert. In this concept, we can truly see how vast the desert is. What I do like is that this is fairly similar to what we did receive, a place retaken by nature after the crawler had devastated the region with its attacks. Desert regions in games are a personal favourite of mine, and I was so glad we got one in Fable. The concept here truly is breathtaking. The vegetation seen here is also great to look at. The designer truly put in a lot of work to create this region and make it as different to Albion as possible, but still allowing it to fit into the world we know. The giant statue at the entrance of the city of Aurora also seems to have gone through various design elements. The final design we received seems to be that of a bold woman, similar to Kalin actually. The statue points at the entrance. As Kalin is the leader of Aurora, I'm assuming that females lead the country. This fits perfectly with the idea of having Aurora as a completely opposite land to Albion, as Albion had traditionally been a patriarchal society. The Aurorans may be matriarchal. The concepts here do show some men, but ultimately, they went for what we received. I love the style and architecture of Aurora. These truly show that Lionhead were basically creating a whole new land in Fable. A great task to accomplish in such a short time frame in the development of the game. These show how the team literally had to create double of everything. For example, the chests in Albion have a completely different design to Aurora. This kind of explains why some aspects of the game feel unfinished. It was such a giant task to complete, and unfortunately, they just did not have enough time. Moving on to the doggos of Albion, my favourite. From the blurb here written by Mike Morton, he explains that they were limited with the breeds they could implement into the game due to the rig they had created for the dogs. We did get a great variation of dogs in the game though. This may explain why we did not see those tiny dogs seen in the previous pieces of concept art, they just didn't fit the frame. We can also see from this that the wolves also were created with the same rigs as the dogs. Interesting. If you kill a wolf, you're basically killing your little pet. The Sand Furies are probably one of the most annoying enemies in the game to fight. As the Auroran version of the bandits in the vast desert, these guys attack the player constantly. While the art for these guys looks great, my attention is pulled to the sand creature. This is something I feel we missed in the desert. A giant creature to fight instead of the constant waves of sand furies. It could maybe be a variation of a sand dragon, but this seems to have large pincers, giant eyes and a large mouth with fangs. Whatever this creature is, or was, I would have loved to see it. Again, I understand due to time constraints, they couldn't put everything in. Still, a part of the fun of making videos like this is that I get to explore these books for the little nuggets of information. The harder creatures of Aurora are the Sentinels and Minions. We meet a version of the minion way back in Fable 1. As the automatrons of Aurora, it can be assumed that these were used on a daily basis by the residents of the land before its fall, but with the darkness taking over, it infects them to fight against the hero of Brightwall, making their journey a little tougher. Nothing too much of a note to mention here, but the art is cool. The Nightcrawler is the antagonist of Fable 3, and his art does not disappoint. It seems Lionhead had a clear view of what they wanted, it just took a few variations to get there. Here we see the variation looking like a member of the Ood from Doctor Who, with glowing eyes and holding a dagger. We can see he later transformed into the ghastly creature we have now. I love the design of the crawler. I do feel it was a great enemy, great story, heartbreaking fight. Now this, in my opinion, is the most interesting part of the whole book. We have Unused Creatures. I did reach out to my sources, but none of them could tell me anything about these, so all of this is pure speculation and thought. The first image we have here is a creature that looks like a more humanoid troll being spoken to by a human adventurer. They seem to be in a giant forest, so it could be suggested that some magical creatures do live in secret away from humanity in forested regions. It's a nice thought to have. The next we see is the extremely disturbing creature that appears to be holding maybe a victim by some strings. What is interesting about this is that a hob seems to be a part of this art too, possibly suggesting an evolution of the hobs, or that they may fall under the influence of this controller. It is a shame we do not know anything about this creature, but its design looks absolutely fantastic. Moving on, we have a similar image of a man wearing a really tall hat. Nothing here to really talk about, just an interesting image I guess. From here, this is where the really fascinating concepts begin. The first we have is a giant creature with super sharp teeth and gross eyes. We can also see similar versions of this creature on its back and in front of it, which means that this could possibly be the mother or father of the creature, and that all of these little ones could grow to this giant size. With the direction that Fable 3 went in, it looks like they went as far away from fantasy creatures as they could. It is a shame really. Looking at the next piece of art, it looks like some sort of structure at sea, but with this page being dedicated to the unused creatures of Fable 3, this could quite possibly be a giant creature that happens to look like a building. With these two pieces, I think they are linked due to the colour and design on the metal on both of them. This creature, again, looks like a sort of boss creature. What I have noticed with these concepts so far is that they all seem to touch on what made Fable what it was, giant fantasy creatures, and a world full of magic. These do look like, at some point, the developers were attempting to bring back magic to the world. We can see here what I assume to be another variation of this creature. They seem to have put a lot of thought into this creature, and it does make me wonder why it was not implemented. Look at that weapon. Wow. In this piece, we have what appear to be maybe sirens or some sort of magical hag. Furthermore, this image has Old Kingdom writings on it, so it would appear that these creatures are thousands of years old. In my opinion, I think they are new versions of the sirens we saw in the Fable 2 art book. Now, onto the final concept. Again, we have seen something similar to this in the Fable 2 art book, and from what I read in the comments for that video, a few of you believed the creature to be some sort of child catcher that turns them into hobs. That would have been a refreshing variation of the hobs, as in my opinion, at this point in Fable 3, I would have hoped that they would have at least evolved into something less silly and maybe something more terrifying. It is a shame they did not implement this mechanic, but it is understandable with the time constraints, or it just didn't fit the vision of the game they were developing. There is nothing really here to comment on in regards to the weapons, but I do really like the design of these. The weapons morphing through the events of the game was a great idea, but in my opinion, I did prefer the weapon system of Fable 1. The art book was super interesting to look through. I love finding behind the scenes information and seeing how different features are implemented and put together. As I said at the beginning of the video, this video is mostly about just showing the concept art and then adding my little thoughts on each one. If you liked this, then please drop a like, and if you really liked it, then go ahead and subscribe. For the future, I do have the Art of Fable Legends, which, after looking through it, has some great concept in there, so I may put something together for that one too. If you have any suggestions for future Fable videos, then please drop them below with your thoughts and comments on this video. Finally, I would like to thank my patrons who are helping to support the channel. I really appreciate you. Thank you to the Old Gods, Detroit, RVWV, Arco, Brunette Jonas and Jojo Scotia, and an extra special thank you to the Elder Ones tier, Scrushroom, Jonas, Lewis and Queen Arby. Thank you guys so much. I think that's everything. Now Hero, enjoy your day.